Hello, I'm Marites Vitug, and this is Worldview. We take a look at global, regional, and national affairs in conversations with officials, newsmakers, and analysts. Bea Cupin, our senior reporter covering foreign affairs and security, will be my co-host on this episode. Hello, Bea.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we are pleased to have with us Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo. We will be talking about a range of foreign policy issues amid the changing geopolitical landscape as well as recent events in the Philippines. Secretary Manalo, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here this morning and talking with you.
I think the first question really is the biggest story of the past few weeks is the arrest and detention of former President Duterte, and he's now in The Hague facing a case on crimes against humanity. You served under Duterte. What are your thoughts on this, and how will it impact Philippine foreign policy?
Well, I've been in the career foreign service for almost four decades. I've actually, in fact, I just counted, I've served under 8 presidents. And each time, of course, throughout all those years that I've served under the 8 administrations, I've always been guided by basically our mandate, Department of Foreign Affairs, as stated in the Constitution of the Philippines, as well as the Republic Act on the Foreign Service, and most importantly, of course, what we call the 3 pillars of our foreign policy. That's promoting national security, economic diplomacy, economic security, and of course assistance to Filipino nationals, and promoting the rights and welfare of Filipinos abroad. So those have always been the guiding posts for me and the DFA throughout all the administrations, and we have never wavered from those basic approaches, regardless of who was the president, since basically all the presidents have also known that is the mandate of the DFA.
So would you, as Secretary of Foreign Affairs, recommend that the Philippines rejoin the ICC?
Well, we haven't really discussed that yet. And of course, any discussion on an issue such as that would involve, of course, the whole government. It would be a whole government approach. We have to take into account the views of the various agencies.
Secretary, President Marcos explained in the context of the arrest of former President Duterte na this was about fulfilling international commitments under Interpol, and that arresting the former president and turning him over to the ICC is what the, quote, international community expects of us. We spoke to Interior Secretary John Vic Remulla. He explained na because the last 6 years daw, prior to 2022, we had damaged our relations with the international community, and until today, we are repairing it. This is one of the important steps in order to regain our credibility again in the international community. Do you agree with this view that ours is a relationship that is still being repaired, that we're still trying to regain this credibility, and how does this perspective guide your work as the Foreign Secretary?
Well, first, I'm not familiar with the context in which that particular quote was made, so it's very hard to comment on that. But on the question of the Philippine participation with the international community, we have always been a very active participant in the international community, with also bilaterally, regionally, multilaterally. In fact, even on the issue of human rights, the Philippines was a member just recently of the Human Rights Council. We were elected there 2 consecutive terms. We just left in 2022 because we couldn't run anymore, and we decided to run for other posts. In fact, the Philippines was the first country in the world to have a human rights program jointly with the United Nations. And that has now ended, and we now have, again, a program on human rights coordination, also in cooperation with other UN agencies. So I don't think that would have happened unless the Philippines was known to have be a great defender of human rights. And we've also participated in so many activities throughout the years, conferences. In fact, most recently we had Women, Peace and Security Conference. We had one on climate change, a big international community event. And in April, we're hosting a conference on like-minded middle-income countries. It's an international conference. So all this really shows that our ties with the international community including the UN, have always been very strong. And I think even, as you know, even bilaterally and regionally, we have enhanced our cooperation with many countries, and including countries we didn't have strong ties with before, but now they're even strengthening further. And so I think basically the Philippines is an active player in the international community, and will continue to do so, especially as we now seek also a seat a non-permanent seat on the Security Council.
Yeah, maybe since you mentioned our bid for the UN Security Council, do we have the votes? And
Well,
how would you describe the campaign? And are we seen by the UN a strong ally of the US, and we will be a voice for the West? What do you say about this?
oh well. First of all, of course, I can't comment on the
You have no crystal
process
ball, sir.
campaign, and of course, this is done. Done in we can not in a public way, but we are of course campaigning very hard with all the members of the United Nations, and because the vote on the Security Council is done by the entire General Assembly, which means the entire membership. So let's just say our approach is now global, and we're now campaigning wherever we can, and with as many countries as we can to get their votes. I think when in our campaign, what we're stressing is just like what I stressed before, that the Philippines, which has a reputation as being a peace builder, peacemaker, and bridge builder, I think that is the basic theme that we're running on. Through the years, the Philippines has always been recognized as an important player on many global issues, whether they be social or even new ones like climate change, on health security, and even on political issues, and especially economic issues. Like I just mentioned, we're hosting a conference of middle-income countries. So our approach will be to stress our contributions to the work of the United Nations in promoting international peace and security, and also inclusive development. And that's what we're running on. And I think that's the reputation that we're running on. As for votes, many issues in the Security Council, it considers so many issues. And we have our own position on practically all of them. We have our definite views. And if our vote happens to coincide with the U.S. vote, it doesn't mean necessarily that you're supporting them. It's our own interests that we're supporting. And we will always be guided by our own national interests. And also our reputation as being a facilitator or peace builder. That will always guide our approach to any issue considered by the Security Council.
So, sir, Kyrgyzstan is our rival, right? For
In the Asian group. In
the Asian group.
Because
so there are other rivals from the.
no, they're not rivals, but the way it's done is every region. There are 5 regions in the UN. Every region puts forth candidate depending on the available seats. Normally, each region has 2 seats. So Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, and it just happens some years only 1 seat is open. So ngayon in the Asian group, 1 seat is available for the term that we're running for 2027 to 28. So Kyrgyzstan and Philippines are vying for 1 seat.
So we're gonna hop on over to bilateral relations.
Okay.
The timing
Sure.
then, because by the end of this week, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is visiting the Philippines for the first time. I guess sir, tanong ng bayan or tanong ng mga people who care a lot about security and defense, the bilateral relationship. How ironclad is ironclad in the context of the second Trump presidency?
Well, I can only base my comment on that, on the second Trump, based on our discussions that we've had already with high-level officials from the President Trump's administration. This includes Secretary of Defense, and I've also met with Secretary Rubio. I met him in Munich, and I've also spoken with him over the phone. We've also had contact with the National Security Advisor Waltz, and the President has also spoken with President Trump. And I have to say that in all of those conversations, the discussions have been very positive and future-oriented. And in fact, discussions are being on how we can cooperate more. For example, in my discussions, not only on defense and security, but even on economic cooperation between the Philippines and the U.S., promoting economic cooperation and thereby promoting economic security and resilience. So I think what I can say, they've been very positive, and I think that I don't think you can get a better indication of that,
Right.
at least so far in our discussions. And the Secretary of Defense is coming here, as you said, this week, and I expect we will even have more fruitful discussions with him, especially when he meets Secretary Teodoro, and he'll also call on the President. I may have an opportunity to speak with him too.
Maybe, sir, one indicator of the positive vibe or relationship with America is that President Trump hasn't mentioned us or Southeast Asia or South China Sea. So he's not on his, we're not on his radar, right?
Well, I don't know. I can't speak, but I think he's also focusing a lot now on, obviously, on other issues, Ukraine, Middle East. And, but as I said, we have had a number of talks already with his high level, the highest level administration officials dealing with foreign policy, defense, and security. And all of them have been very positive. And in fact, we haven't heard anything even negative. So, in fact, everything we've heard has been positive and future-oriented, which is also a good sign. So, I think we're working on that basis. And in fact, there, as you know, there's a possibility of maybe in the near future of a visit or a meeting between President Trump and President Marcos Jr. So all these are in the works. And at the moment, there hasn't been really anything that would give us a different impression of not being positive.
Sir, when you say future-oriented, what sort of future is that? Is it more of the same? Is it a different kind of future for the
Well,
US
for
and the
example,
Philippines?
economic cooperation, we're looking at cooperation in newer areas, especially building more cooperation in areas where we've started, but we want to build more, like energy, renewable energy, areas such as AI, cybersecurity cooperation, things like that. And that's what creates that air of optimism, because you're not just trying to solidify what's already there, but you're thinking of newer areas to cooperate. Of course, we'll still have to meet to identify specifics, but the general trend is approach will be along those lines.
Sir, do you worry about Trump's alignment with Russia? I mean, clearly indications are that, you know, his worldview is that Russia is an ally of the U.S. and he has this aversion towards Europe and Canada. So does it worry you that that the world has changed?
Well, well, he has certainly a different approach now to the issues, and but I think we just have to give the. I think that's a U.S. decision on how that's their own policy. Obviously, we have always supported, for example, in Ukraine, we have supported all efforts towards peace and ceasefire. And of course, we recognize that the parties involved will have to be the ones eventually to agree on any peace deal. But the Philippines has consistently supported efforts at peace in Ukraine. But without prejudging, of course, the details. But in fact, we participated in 2 peace conferences already the past year on Ukraine. So, nevertheless, we've also supported Ukraine in the United Nations, at least on the issue of sovereignty. But certainly, any effort at peace we would welcome. But we would leave it up to the parties to decide on the elements or the details of any peace agreement or any ceasefire.
So you've spoken about economic ties with the U.S., defense ties, but I mean, a lot of Filipino non-governmental organizations have been affected, continue to be affected by the cutting of U.S. aid. How does that figure in our relationship with the U.S.? And are we worried that because the U.S. is pulling out of their global commitments in terms of health, education, that leaves a vacuum, and that vacuum might be filled by a country like, let's say, China?
Well, first of all, the decision of the U.S. to, for example, withdraw from some UN agencies, of course, is their own sovereign right. I think another country has also withdrawn. One of the Latin American countries has withdrawn from one or two of the recently from UN agencies. So it's really a sovereign right. Every country decides what's in its best interest. Naturally, I think in terms of the UN, the U.S. Does provide a lot of funding. So I understand that because of that, you will just have to tighten your belts, some of the organizations. But that, in the case of the Philippines, that doesn't stop us from pursuing our goals in the United Nations, even though the U.S. may not be a member of some of them. In terms of the, yes, there will be a vacuum, and it's really up to countries now to see how we can fill the vacuum, given, and maybe, as I said, tighten our belts, maybe, but nothing prevents us from cooperating and dealing with issues, and we just have to continue, because there's still over hundreds of countries who are members of these organizations.
But sir, as Marites mentioned, no, with the world changing so casually, is there space for other countries to step in and fill that vacuum that the U.S. might or is leaving behind by pulling out of their foreign aid?
Well, I suppose it depends, but I think countries like the Philippines can step in, and also in terms of cooperation and activities. And so we will work to that. And of course, if the U.S. wishes to return, they're always welcome. But I think we have to keep on, working together with the other members of the United Nations. And so far, our plans have been on that way, have been continuing along those steps. Because, as I said, if a country wishes to leave an organization, it's their sovereign right.
Sir, you've always talked about the Philippines diversifying its security cooperation.
Yeah.
And we have concluded negotiations with Canada and New Zealand. So is France going to be next? And do you see other countries after France with which we'll be doing visiting forces agreement?
Well, I'm not ruling out arrangements with other countries of the nature we had with New Zealand, for example, focusing a lot on humanitarian cooperation and operational activities working together. As you know, we have already with Japan, we're working with, and we have an MOU of defense cooperation with Canada. And of course, you mentioned New Zealand. We have cooperation with Australia. And I think France, I'm not ruling out that possibility. As you know, France now is increasing its presence in the Indo-Pacific. And I think they're seeing now the importance of our region to the international community, to the globe itself. So I think that's a possibility. And even the United Kingdom is showing greater interest now in the Indo-Pacific. So, and France, as you know, is also participated in the two Balikatan exercise. So I think that's a good indication of a greater interest. So given that, I wouldn't rule it out sometime in the future.
Do we see countries from ASEAN or the region possibly reaching out to the Philippines? Have they reached out to the Philippines for possible soft bus or RAAs?
Well, there's been no discussion on that, but we are cooperating with ASEAN countries bilaterally. We have maritime cooperation arrangements with Vietnam, which is now also a strategic partner. We're also talking with Malaysia. Even with Brunei, we've signed a memorandum on maritime cooperation. So I think that's the step that we're taking with the ASEAN countries and individually.
Sir, we have a defense cooperation agreement with Singapore, right? So what does that entail? I mean, is that like a VFA?
Well,
similar to?
Not a VFA as such, but I think I'm not familiar with the details of that arrangement, but certainly it allows, as I understand, training and exchange of officials, etc. And as I said, as the global or the regional or global situation evolves, I think many of these arrangements will also evolve accordingly.
To jump to another security topic, sir, early in January this year, law enforcement authorities presented to the public Chinese nationals that they say conducted espionage operations in the Philippines to spy on military, vital infrastructure, and even try to capture the elites in the Philippines. What steps and what else can the Philippines do to catch these alleged spies, not just from China, but I guess from other...
Well, and that of course, I'll have to defer to our national security agencies, police. But naturally, I'm sure that in protecting our security, we are not looking for any particular nationality. Any person from any nationality who breaks our laws, certainly, or is accused of some kind of espionage, certainly will have to be dealt with according to our law. And that is really handled by our judicial agencies or security agencies. So, of course, it isn't within their purview of how to handle it. But naturally, that is their job, to ensure the security of the Philippines internally.
And also 3 Filipinos are now currently detained, and 2 or 3 of them are former scholars. And we understand that, we are thinking that this may lead to a prisoner exchange. Has China sent a message, to you, or maybe to other officials in the Philippine government?
Of course, we know of that. We've not received anything of that nature, and I don't think they're related. But the point is, of course, we're aware of the situation, and in fact, our consular officials are in touch with the Filipinos who are now under investigation, and they're in regular touch with them.
But they were alleged to be spies.
Well, I think it's still under investigation, so I really can't comment on that stage.
Speaking of China and our conversations with China, will you disclose to us the contents of the provisional agreement? Okay,
I can't.
I'm joking. But sir,
No.
what is the prospects of this agreement? Do we see this agreement siguro being a different agreement, perhaps, applied to different features of the West Philippines?
Well, let me just say the provisional understanding, which was signed, in fact, I think I signed it, but it was signed some months ago. And so far, we've had 4 or 5 supply missions without incident. And I can say, without divulging the specific content, that in arriving at that arrangement, the Philippines did not surrender any of its basic or any of its positions, insofar as the South China Sea is concerned. And therefore we have reached the understanding, but our positions have not been compromised, and they remain the same.
Sir, we have learned from various informed sources that under the provisional agreement, China Coast Guard escorts the Philippine resupply boats to Sierra Madre, while our Coast Guard ship just watches from a distance. Is this accurate, and is this fulfilling, satisfying for the Philippine government? Satisfactory, rather, for the Philippine government?
I don't know where you got escort, who's saying that. But,
various informed sources, sir.
Well, maybe they're not that informed. But we get our information from those who actually, the Coast Guard. And there's been no such thing as escorting. Obviously, they have to know you're coming, but they also tell us that they're there. So that's more or less how it works.
Sir, siguro the public is also wondering, bakit nga ba hindi public yung...
Hindi public.
Bakit hindi public yung provisions ng arrangement na ito? Could you explain, siguro, for a layman?
Well, una, it's provisional, so it's subject to change.
Yeah.
And ang importante nito, it was an agreement, and it was not what they had before, the so-called gentleman's agreement, where there was no record. So here there's a record, and I suppose if any incident happens which is inconsistent with the understanding, we will have a basis to do it, to let's say complain. But so far, everything has worked. So far, that's at least 4 or 5. And so I think it's probably it's better to leave it that way, because I just to assure you that as I said, none of our positions have been compromised, and there's nothing there that mentions escorting or anything. It's purely to allow the missions to proceed with their humanitarian supplies missions.
Sir, you mentioned July last year, this agreement, understanding was at least disclosed to the public, more or less five resupply missions, uneventful. We like hearing uneventful nowadays. But how would you describe Philippine-China relations at this point?
Well, certainly there are irritants and there's tension, especially on the South China Sea. And that is something that we're all aware of and has risen, and the tension, of course, has of course risen, especially over the last 2 years. Nevertheless, our relations with China on the economic front, of course, are continuing.
Yeah.
We have strong relations with them, as all countries do, and also in other areas. But definitely on the South China Sea, there are tensions simply because we are still unable really to exercise fully our rights within our own exclusive economic zone, exercise our sovereign rights in areas which are clearly within our exclusive economic zone. And so that will always lead to tensions. And as long as China also seeks to apply its domestic laws to areas in our EEZ or maintain its a vast number of Coast Guard vessels, which could harass or potentially prevent us from fulfilling our missions, or even unprofessional behavior like what happened with the overflight. And that will always cause tensions. And of course, we're committed to trying to manage them and to do it in a diplomatic, peaceful way, and we will continue to do it. But those are certainly activities which will cause tension.
Sir, about the monster boats that have been visited, or a monster boat that has been coming to the Philippines, do you think this is part of monster boat diplomacy, like, the gunboat diplomacy of old? Do you think China's using this as leverage or to pressure the Philippines to concede a big...
Well, I don't know what Chinese plans are, but we're certainly concerned and looking closely on how this thing develops, those monster ships, whether it will become something regular. And you see, that's also the cause of tension. We're not quite sure what China is planning, especially within our EEZ. And that's one reason I think we're getting also support from other countries in these joint sails, joint patrols, our status of forces arrangements, because what happens in the South China Sea is not only going to affect the Philippines. First of all, it affects international law, rules-based order, but then it also affects the belief that the South China Sea and Indo-Pacific should be free and open, and no country can claim the sea. So and we are supported in that view by many. So I think we're not the only ones probably who are looking at this with some concern, the developments. And that's what is, I think that's what other countries are also seeing too. That's why I think we're cooperating more with many, not because necessarily they agree with us on everything, but because they probably see the situation the same way. So we have common interests in addressing this issue.
Speaking about the Greater Pacific, sir, could you talk to us about the Philippines Pacific initiatives?
Well, we see the importance now of expanding our relations with the Pacific Island Forum countries. In fact, we're an observer at the Pacific Island Forum, but I think it's high time that we build our ties with them, which are there, but I think we now should do it in a concerted way. Because they're also part of the Indo-Pacific. In fact, they might be area-wise, maybe the biggest part. And our strategy is to see how we can cooperate with them in specific areas, such as in providing technical assistance, capacity building, and cooperating with them on common issues which are common or common challenges. And I think one of the biggest is climate change and natural disaster reduction. And in fact, we're planning to have a meeting this year hosted here in the Philippines with the Pacific Island Forum countries to discuss the among other security aspects of climate change, natural disaster reduction, because we all face similar issues. In fact, when the president of Palau came here, he met President Marcos. We have very common challenges with them, especially on climate change. Also migration and on health. They also see the Philippines as a potential health destination for them.
Because
for health security.
the Pacific is now a battleground between the two superpowers, US and China. So how are we perceived by the Pacific island countries?
I think they look at the Philippines too as a friendly country, and that we should work together, just as we are trying to work together with our other partners here, like ASEAN. Because of course the geopolitical tensions have also reached their area, and they're very similar to what we are experiencing here. And I think, as I said, that's one part where the middle countries, the middle powers, the smaller countries, the middle countries should be working together, cooperating more, so that we have a bigger say in how our region develops. I think we share a common view that the great powers should not be the ones who determine our future. And what better way to do that is than to work together and on specific cooperative activities.
I think the president verbalized that in Canberra, was it, or Australia? Yeah, he spoke about that.
He said
before
that, and I think that's the way we're going, because in our world today, you need friends.
Yeah.
And the best way is you work together, and friends are best way to have a friend is to partner.
Yeah.
and partner with each other, which we are attempting to do. That's our Pacific initiative.
Are there barriers, though, Secretary, like
Saan?
with bringing together these middle?
No, before kasi distance and but now we have the technology to and political will to work together. I think we have the same Pacific. Also in Africa, we're trying to expand our ties with Africa. They've been there, but I think now we have to work harder. I mean, bit by bit, and you have to identify issues where you can work together and then build from there, because it's very important that we do so. And in fact, on the Pacific, we approved, and it was approved by Congress, that we will open up our first embassy in the Pacific Island, hopefully this year at least, in Fiji, which is which hosts the Pacific Island Forum. So, and we're an observer. So I hope if we have an embassy there, it will further improve our ability to cooperate with all the Pacific Island countries, since the forum is located in Suva.
Sir, on the topic of ASEAN chairmanship, the Philippines will chair ASEAN next year. So what are the goals? What are your goals? Do you expect the Code of Conduct on the South China Sea to be finally concluded after decades?
Well, it would be nice if it's concluded under Philippine chairmanship. But they're still negotiating. I think, without going into the details, I think they've already had 3 rounds of negotiations, and I think they more or less discuss and the technical issues. There are many, but as the president said in Laos last year at the summit, there are still some big ticket issues which have not been fully discussed, and the Philippine position has always been that we must have an effective and substantive code of conduct.
A legal binding document?
Well, that's one of the, you see, before it can become effective and substantive, you have to discuss some of these big ticket or milestone issues. One of them is whether the code will be, in the end, legally binding or not. And then second, what is the relationship of the code, since it will, to the non-members or non-parties to the code? How will it work? And the code has to be, in our view, consistent with international law and rules-based. And also, in some ways, what is the scope of the code? How do you define the South China Sea?
Yeah.
So these are issues which would have to be addressed. Otherwise, even if you have agreed on some of the technical details, what to do if this thing happens, but without those, without an agreement on that, it will be hard to have a code. But I think discussions will begin again on those issues, but this time more seriously. So, who knows? Maybe by our chairmanship next year, all of them will be answered.
Is it our aspiration, Secretary, for it to be concluded when the Philippines shares?
Well, our aspiration is that it will be concluded when we believe, Philippines, that it is an effective and substantive document. If that can be, if we see it that way by next year, then why not? But naturally, we are committed, and I think every country in the negotiations is committed to expediting negotiations.
Because the President has doubled down on emphasizing the need to conclude.
Yeah, we would like to conclude it, but of course, our interests have to be covered.
Sir, is it possible for the claimant countries within Southeast Asia to come together and, in what they call minilateral, to forge a united front against China?
Well,
Or is Malaysia impossible?
let me divide that into two.
Okay.
First, yes, we are trying to enhance our talks with the claimants on a bilateral basis, Vietnam, Brunei, and Malaysia. And we're seeking, in fact, last year we had an MOU with Vietnam, MOU with Brunei, and part of that to see how we can cooperate on maritime activities and settle any disputes through peaceful diplomatic means, etc. And we're also talking now with Malaysia. And I think, and also we're discussing that, and I believe that it's also important the claimant states discuss more on the code of conduct, at least the ASEAN claimant states. I don't think I can discuss with the others, but I think the ASEAN, and I think there's a role that the claimant states in ASEAN could play in terms of the negotiations on the COC. So I think that will also be explored because the claimant states will probably be the most affected by the code. So I think that's the aim. But bilaterally, yes, we're discussing with them, and so hopefully we can find ways of working together on the code of conduct negotiations.
Sir, for the first time last year, the Philippines was invited. You were present at the G7 meeting in Italy. Why is this significant? And do you think this will continue to be significant in the light of the change again in the U.S., wherein there's a coming split between the U.S. and Europe?
Well, I think just from my perspective, I was invited, or Philippines was invited to the G7 to discuss specifically the situation in the Indo-Pacific. And I think, I believe that we were invited along with India and I think Indonesia because of the recognition of the G7 on the importance, the seriousness of the situation in the South China Sea and the importance of seeing that conflict does not erupt. And I think it also, in a way, signified support for our position on the South China Sea, basically the importance of abiding by our international law, rules-based order, and our approach of trying to manage the disputes through diplomatic means. I think this was, my being invited was recognition of that approach. And the fact that they also supported, the G7 countries supported in their statements our approach and the importance of international law. And at the same time, the importance of the South China Sea as a strategic waterway, and that it is an issue concerning the international community and not just the littoral countries around the South China Sea. So there's I think that reflects the concern now that they're showing to what's going on in South China Sea and the broader Indo-Pacific.
So you think Europe is stepping up, will step up, or is stepping up in the light of the US's, withdrawal from international commitment?
Stepping up in the South China Sea.
Yes,
Yeah.
support for us and.
Well, I believe so. As we talked about earlier, for example, individual EU countries are increasing their presence here, through their sales. Like just the other week, France aircraft carrier passed through. German ships have come here. The UK. I just met the UK foreign minister earlier this month. And again, it's clear that they have now an Indo-Pacific strategy for this. And the same with the EU. And in fact, I believe the new EU foreign minister is planning to visit the Philippines too. And that would signify, again, a growing interest in this region. So I think they begin to see how connected we all are, and that it's important that we coordinate, and especially amongst like-minded countries or partners and friends.
Thank you very much, sir, for this interview. And on that upbeat note, we'd like also to thank our viewers. And Bea?
But before we go, we'd like to invite you to join the conversation. You can download the Rappler Communities app and find me and Marites, and maybe even Secretary Manalo, in the Security and Global Affairs chat channel.
All right, that's it for today's show. Thank you to our viewers. This has been Worldview with Marites Vitug. Till next time.